Hey everyone, welcome to Quantum Identity. And this is the only podcast that explores how you got from who you were to where you are today. And our guests have incredible stories of personal transformation. And we're going to share an amazing story with you today. So, my first guest on episode 1 of Quantum Identity is my friend Charles West. Now, Charles is a musical artist, a singer, a Broadway performer, as well as a certified life coach, hypnotherapist, energy master, motivational speaker, and author. And Charles, I want to welcome you to Quantum Identity. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Francis. I'm happy to be here.
So you have an amazing story that I'm really looking forward to going in deep on and sharing with our listeners. And but just to explain a little bit about who you are and what you do. So you've built this amazing transformational coaching, life coaching business in Divine Spark.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with that?
Yes. So Divine Spark Coaching, I received the idea and the inspiration to create Divine Spark a couple of years ago. And I received this idea because I knew that I had gotten to a place in my life where my mission was to help people. And I knew that a lot of the things that I had experienced in my life, a lot of the challenges that I've had, and a lot of the victories that I've had too, have uniquely put me in a place where I have specific wisdom. I have spiritual wisdom. I have specific experiences that are really valuable in helping other people to not only transcend challenging and difficult experiences in their lives, but to be able to also be in a place in their lives where things are going great and they know that they are worthy of them. You know what I mean? Like whether it's getting married or a new job, something's great is happening and they have the self-worth to be able to sustain it because they have a solid foundation that everything is built upon. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, so Divine Spark Coaching started off with becoming a certified life mastery consultant through the Life Mastery Institute. And so my business started off with that. And about this time last year, I decided, well, actually, I had the desire to add something else into my coaching toolbox. I didn't know what that might be, and so I did a lot of seeking. And eventually, I was guided to Marisa Peer, the Marisa Peer School, and RTT, Rapid Transformational Therapy, which is an amazingly powerful style of hypnotherapy. Once I investigated what RTT is and what it can do, it spoke to my heart, and I knew that I had to do it. I wanted to train in that. And so now I actually have my life coaching curriculum that I work with clients on. I have independent RTT clients, but I also have something that I call my hypno coaching program. So I have a 3-month hypno coaching program as well that helps people with 3 different RTT sessions with a coaching call in between each one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, I'm just really, really blessed and really love doing that. And so, as you said, yeah, I'm working on a book. I'm also working on creating some content for a couple of corporate organizations that are interested in having some corporate wellness programs designed for them.
Okay, and so speaking of transcendence and transformation, and so RTT is all about transformation, right? I would
Yes.
love to understand a little bit more about your own transformation. Tell us about the old Charles West, how you got to transforming yourself into a coach, into finding your calling. Who were you before all of this?
Oh, that's a big question because if you met me and if you looked at my resume, And if you based on, like, if I based on who I thought I was, which my identity was on my career, how I looked, how I presented myself, I looked like the height of success. I looked like I had it all going on and there couldn't be anything lacking. So there was the external, but then there was a big contrast between how I presented myself and the internal. What I didn't know for most of my life was that I had a very low sense of self-worth and self-esteem. That goes way back to issues from my childhood, 5 years old, 8 years old, 12 years old, different traumatic experiences that I had that really affected me powerfully and created some real disconnect in who I was and who I felt I was. In fact, for the first 18 years of my life, so I was a really chubby kid, and I got bullied throughout school, through all of the years of my schooling, because I was a smart kid, I was a talented kid, and I was really quiet. And until I was 18 years old, I never looked in the mirror and saw who was there. You know what I mean? Like, I never saw myself. And somehow, and so I got to be really, 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 really quite fat by the time I graduated from high school. I was 225 pounds and a 42-inch waist. And the year after that, I lost like 50 pounds. Here was another instance where my identity changed on the outside, but I was the same on the inside. And it was very confusing to me because people responded differently to me based on how I looked. Somehow I lost all this weight and it looked like I had a physique, even though I'd never worked out in my life. And I was perceived as like this attractive guy, and I started getting cast in shows, and I began dating. And so people were responding to my physicality, and it was really, really confusing for me because inside I was still that same wounded little boy. So, but the value, so what I took on by whatever everyone was responding to me as, was that the value, what was important was how I looked. And so through all of my 20s and into my 30s, when I was 29, I moved to New York, and I had a career performing on Broadway for a number of years. It turned out that within the first 5 years of living in New York City, I did 3 different Broadway shows. I did the national tour of Miss Saigon for a year and a half. And I was in a place where everything on the outside looked like it was going really well. And in fact, the 3rd Broadway show that I did, when I was in a show called The Scarlet Pimpernel, I was actually asked to be on a jockey underwear billboard in Times Square representing the show. Mm-hmm. And it was a big deal. There were 7 different performers from Broadway shows that were on this billboard. And, it was a big media event, the unveiling of it, and it was there for 10 months in Times Square, right across the street from my theater. And it was during this time, Francis, that I began to notice some strange things going on with my energy, with my emotions. And I didn't understand it then, but I definitely understand it now. And it's actually become a really big part of what I bring what I offer to my clients and to friends in general. And that is, there were actually times when I would go outside onto the street below the billboard, and I would look up at myself on the billboard. And it was almost like I was having a conversation with myself up there, because I didn't understand. There was a feeling inside of me that felt empty. I didn't understand what it was pertaining to, but I thought, how is it that the guy up there on the billboard looks so confident, so self-assured, and like he's got it all going on? But inside of me, here I was, I'd been in New York for only 5 years, and I was living the dream. And look, I'd worked really hard to get to that place where I was actually doing what I'd always wanted to do, and I was doing it. But inside, I was very unfulfilled. I didn't understand the contrast. And so I would have conversations with this billboard version of me, and it was confusing because I wasn't really receiving the answers that I needed. The answers that I really was looking for didn't come to me for at least about another 7 or 8 years.
But what were your questions, Charles?
Well, the big question for me was, why is it that it looks like on the outside that I am thriving? Like it looks like I was in a relationship at the time, and I had a really nice home in Manhattan. I was successful career-wise, but internally, my own sense of self-worth, frankly, it was really all about my self-worth, and my self-love was very, very small and not very bold. I had a very, my sense of confidence was really struggling. And so the main question that I had for myself, the billboard version of myself, was how do I feel genuinely confident and within myself, like you look up there, because I don't feel that way.
I know that what you're saying is really common with a lot of artists, I think, and performers, especially because I was a performer as well, and I was on stage, and it's amazing. Like we can get on stage and do things, and I'm sure like you can stand there in front of hundreds, if not thousands, of people and bare your heart and soul in a one moment. But then when the show is over, you go back to being yourself, right? And so I think that there's something to appreciate about, like, when you're an actor or a performer, a lot of the time you're stepping into a character that isn't you. You're being someone else. So actually your job is being another identity. And so maybe part of that is in playing other roles every day, day in, day out. Sometimes you can neglect,
you can lose yourself,
your own identity.
If you hadn't really found yourself to begin with, so what I have come to understand is that ever since I was a little boy, I really was trying to find myself. I was trying to find myself in getting good grades. I was seeking I was trying to find myself through validation and acceptance. I was trying to find myself by proving myself that I could achieve great things. And like you just said, yeah, for sure. A lot of artists can be this way, but over the years, I have talked to Wall Street investment bankers, emergency room nurses and doctors, mothers and fathers, designers, lawyers, every industry. Almost anything you do. I mean, you're playing a role. People that are in IT. You're playing a role in a way, and very often we can become so identified with that role that we don't really know who we are. We kind of lose ourselves, and that's so a big part of my struggle throughout my 20s and even through a lot of my 30s as well, was everything looking so good on the outside, but it was not connected to a solid foundation. And a big part of my growth and a big part of the journey that's helped me to get to where I am now is really looking at the foundation that everything in my life is built upon. Because if you listen, I mean, if you have a life, like say this is your foundation here, if there are cracks of low self-esteem or low self-worth or like any form of self-sabotage, and for me, no connection to a higher power, if there are cracks like that in the foundation, anything you build on top of that will crumble. And so for me, my foundation, the foundation that all of my dreams were built upon, all of the work, all of the, being an opera student in school when I, and pursuing my dreams in New York, the foundation that all of that was built upon had cracks in it. And it turned out that the more success I had and the more expectations I had for then advancing more, getting into television and film, getting bigger roles, all of that actually put more pressure on the foundation, and it crumbled.
How did it crumble?
It did.
Can you explain how it
Yeah.
crumbled?
Well, the crumbling of my foundation happened after 9/11. So at the time of 9/11, I lived in Lower Manhattan, not too far from Ground Zero. I did not have any physical scars, but I did witness the second tower collapse through my bedroom window, and of course lived in the area of, Ground Zero. From then on, for about at least another year and a half until I moved a little bit farther, more uptown, and it was incredibly traumatic. And frankly, and I will be honest, my drinking increased a lot. My acting out, and actually there were periods of time where I used drugs, and I really, really struggled with the trauma of going through that experience. It wasn't until several years after that, after I actually had gotten sober and I was having dinner with some friends and we were talking about our own experiences of 9/11 and, what we had gone through, and I shared with them what I experienced. And one of them said, "Oh, so you're a 9/11 survivor." And it was so strange because I never had identified myself as a 9/11 survivor, but because I didn't have any physical scars and you can't see the emotional wounds. But the emotional wounds were making themselves painfully obvious in all of the areas of my life.
Because that's really interesting because, where, identity, I think, is also a linguistic characteristic. Because you see, once you were given a label, or once someone else could just articulate or define you, essentially your identity, you then identified as a 9/11 survivor. And so what that means, it also, there are certain characteristics of a 9/11 survivor as well. And so I find it really fascinating that sometimes our lives, we're confused in life a lot of the time. It can be frustrating and confusing for a lot of different reasons, where you are and how you got to where you are. And then all of a sudden, through language, you can start to basically find your place and be aware of where you are and who you are and how you got there. And actually that awareness is really powerful because then you can start to take action in your life.
And heal.
Yeah.
And heal.
And heal, yes.
Heal, yeah.
Heal.
Without that healing and without the kind of transformation that you're talking about, I would have just continued acting out in destructive, self-destructive behaviors that weren't serving me well.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I know quite a few people that were traumatized by 9/11 and drank themselves to death, or did other things. It was a horrific experience for people all around the world, but especially if you lived right there. But it's like, I thought of myself as like, I'm a strong guy, I'm very resilient. I should be able to just muscle my way through this experience. That does not work.
I'm not a doctor, but you probably had post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, I did, but I didn't know it.
Yeah. That's the thing, is because people sort of think like, they have a very limited understanding of these type of issues. And, there's a label, or there's this idea that, you can only get PTSD, post-traumatic PTSD, if you go to a war zone or anything like that. But Yeah, I definitely. So, what was it that, what was the spark that ignited the flame to turn things around, quit the drugs and alcohol and accessing in that way, and sort of fill your life with something else and turn it into another direction?
Well, so I had been really struggling. I lived in Miami. So after 9/11 happened, I lived in New York for about another year and a half, and I ended up moving to Miami to kind of regroup, just like get away. And that's where I got sober in 2004. But I started uh, trying to get sober in 2003, not successfully. I just wasn't done. But at that time, I was co-producing and I was co-writing and performing house music. I was writing house music for DJs would play my songs on the dance floor, and I had written some songs, and this DJ and producer in LA found out, learned about me. We had become friends, and they're like, "Hey, Charles, if you can come out to LA, we want to record some of your songs." So I booked a flight. I went out there, and well, one thing led to another, and I ended up binging for about a day and a half, and I ended up in a coma 1 month before my 40th birthday. So
That's a lot
yeah,
of binging.
that's a lot of binging. That's a lot of foolish behavior, a lot of addictive behavior, poor choices. Really, really, I was really struggling, and I ended up in this hospital in Los Angeles. And well, you asked about the spark. What was the spark? So this is what happened. I was taken up to my own room in the hospital, and I remember. I mean, I was in a very bleary state, of course, and but I remember a nurse came in to check on me, to see, check my vitals, to see how I was doing. I was awake, and after she left, I remembered I was doing an appraisal of my body. It's like, how was I feeling? Where am I? What's going on? I didn't remember what happened. And out of nowhere, it was like I was feeling two man's hands on my shoulders, and I heard a man's voice. So the hands on my shoulders were like shaking me back and forth like this, like an angry and concerned, loving father would like be shaking their son, like, to try to shake some sense into them. And I heard this voice saying over and over and over again, as I was being shaken, the voice was saying, "This is not who I created you to be. This is not who I created you to be. This is not who I created you to be." Over and over again. And then it stopped, and it was like all of the lies that I believed about myself, all of the twisted decisions that I might have made along in the years of my life, the ways I didn't know how to love myself. So many things flashed before my eyes. And here I was, it was 1 month before my 40th birthday. I almost accidentally killed myself. I almost killed myself accidentally. I never felt suicidal, ever. But I realized that I did not know myself at all. So I had the identity of a great looking guy with a great voice and this successful Broadway performer. But the thing about having an identity on the outside is that if on the inside, what I didn't know 1 month before my 40th birthday is that I was a wounded little 5-year-old boy on the inside. So the thing is like whatever identity a person might have, whether it's a mother, a Wall Street banker, an emergency room nurse, whatever it is, they may have that external identity, but if they haven't tended to their own emotional journey, and a lot of the things that I have studied, especially in the life coaching and in the hypnotherapy training and certification I've had, does a lot of deep dives into looking into the things that you have experienced in your childhood between the ages of especially 2 and 10, but sometimes even past lives. Because what I came to understand was that a lot of the experiences that I had as a little boy when I was 5 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, being bullied in school, or being told when I was 5 years old in church that I was an abomination, or that, you know, God killed Jesus because of you and your sinfulness, and all of these things that I was told about God. I mean, it was incredibly harmful to me. And it was about, I would say it was about 7 years ago, I realized that, okay, I've done a lot of work on healing the emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse that I'd experienced. But the only thing that I had not really even touched yet was the spiritual abuse. And I really had to come to terms with the fact that what I experienced in the church as a little boy was actually spiritual abuse. I'd never heard anybody actually really use those words before, but when I said them out loud one day to a friend, it made complete sense to me that I had to heal that spiritual abuse. And I've done it. I've done it. I have an amazing connection with something that I call a loving God that has nothing to do with the Bible, or nothing to do with a building or a church or an organized religion.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the most important things in my life.
It's interesting that it takes so many years, sometimes, and some type of trigger event for people to experience that. And as Eckhart Tolle, one of my favorite spiritual teachers, says, he says, when you've suffered enough, that's when spiritual awakening can happen. Meaning, you know, you get to, you know, this is not for everyone, because some people have a very high pain tolerance. Like, I've seen people suffering a lot and they still don't experience
that was me.
liberation.
That was me.
Well, you know, the thing is, obviously, it wasn't enough. You see, it had to go deeper, deeper, and darker, to the point where you nearly killed yourself, and it was all over. That was your moment. That was when you had suffered enough, you know, and something inside you, maybe it's like the authentic, the true you came out and said, this is it. This is who you are.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's what it took. So, oh, that's an amazing story. So tell us a little bit about your, you know, what you're up to now, and how do you help people?
How do I help people? Well, so can I back up let me back up just a little bit to what actually led into the forming of my business.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
My business is called Divine Spark Coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you would go back with me to August of 2016, so not even 3 years ago, I tripped and I fell one day, and I realized a few hours later that I had developed a hernia, and it was something really simple. I went to the hospital, they examined me, and within 3 days, I was on the operating table getting this hernia repaired. However, they weren't able to actually do the hernia surgery, because when they entered my navel with a laparoscopic camera, they discovered something going on inside of me that was not supposed to be happening. So the doctors had to abort the hernia repair and brought me out of anesthesia. And eventually the physician came back in and explained to me we weren't able to do the hernia repair because we witnessed a growth. He called it a growth or a mass about the size of a lemon on your liver. And so we took some biopsies and we sent them off to the lab, and we'd like to keep you here at least overnight and run some more tests. He could see that I was in shock. I mean, because I had been displaying no symptoms of any kind at all. In fact, you know, by then I was sober for 12 years. I was newly married, and everything in my life had been going amazingly well. And so he could see I was in shock. And so he excused himself and said, Mr. West, when you have any questions, I'm just going to be right out here beyond, in the next room. Please just call for me. And so I bawled my face off. I cried and I prayed. I prayed the serenity prayer for about, I don't even know, 20 minutes to half an hour. I just bawled my face off and I prayed. I cried and I prayed and I cried and I prayed. And when it was all done, all the prayers were said and all the tears were shed, underneath all of that, I had this knowing. I realized that I actually was going to be able to rely on something that I call all the spiritual muscles that I'd been building for the 12 years previously. And because I had no idea what was yet to come, it still was 3 more months before I actually received a diagnosis of it, but it was an extremely, extremely traumatic experience, time for me. And so I discovered that there was a place underneath where I had faith in my faith. And so we all go through challenging periods in our life, and having faith is an amazing thing. It's crucial, but there's actually deeper levels when you really, really are building your spiritual muscles. And this does not necessarily have to do with God. If somebody, say is an atheist or agnostic, you can still build spiritual muscles, or you can call them attitudinal muscles, muscles to build your enthusiasm and to be able to support you through the hard times. So, and that's what I did. That's what I did after the overdose experience. And then, which was 12 years apart from, I call them actually, it's almost sort of like a TED talk that I have in my head that I haven't done yet. It's called A Tale of Two Hospital Beds. So the first hospital bed experience was in LA in 2004. The second hospital bed experience was in Brooklyn in 2016, 12 years apart. Both incredibly traumatic experiences. And yet here I am now, less than 3 years after that second hospital bed experience, with this business that's thriving, that's going well. I'm serving people. As you said, I'm helping people. What was it that I did in between those two hospital bed experiences that makes it possible for me to do what I'm doing now? I built spiritual muscles, and I learned how to heal. I learned how to really love and accept myself. And so in order to be able to help clients and to just simply to be able to be a good husband, to be able to be a good colleague, it took me a lot of effort, and now it's not even effort, it's just who I am, to become a man of integrity, a man that people can really rely upon.
That's a really powerful story, Charles. And so as a coach, how do you help people in their own transformations when they come to you?
It depends on what's needed. I love using metaphors, and I love using, like you, I love using stories and analogies. And so I have something that an invisible, I call it my spiritual toolbox. And I sort of imagine that it's sort of like attached to my hip. And I have, depending upon what's going on with the client, I have all these different tools, all of these different exercises or ideas or stories from my own life or things that I've studied, spiritual principles that I've studied that I can offer to them. So, however, on top of all of that, as a certified life mastery consultant through the Life Mastery Institute, I am certified and trained to take clients through several different programs. They're actually courses. The first one that most people take is called the Dream Builder course. It's all about building a dream life for yourself 3 years in the future. And you create the blueprint for the life that you would love to be able to live. You bridge the gap in between where you are now and where you'd love to be, and then you build. Then you build it. You take action steps to be able to actually build that life. So that's one of the programs that I have. The next one is called Life Mastery, and it's a 6-month program. It's the most foundational, heavy-duty course that's a part of the Life Mastery Institute curriculum. And there's a couple others as well. There's working with the laws of the universe and Into Your Genius as well, which is really, really fascinating, all about cultivating your imagination, your instincts, your intuition. It's really fantastic. So those are different aspects of being a life mastery consultant that I offer to my clients that are incredibly helpful and very powerful for everyone. Besides that, I have my own spiritual wisdom that I bring to the table as well, humbly, and it's really amazing to be able to do that. I have a big appetite for what I call spiritual ice cream, and what that means is like different types of books or movies or webinars, master classes, things that feed me, that feed my soul, that feed my spirit. And I love calling it spiritual ice cream because it's non-dairy and it has no sugar or calories too. And so I like when I go about my business, you know, I live in Brooklyn, but a lot of my activities are in Manhattan, and I have my backpack, which is my portable office. I have my iPad. I always have some sort of powerful book. The last one that I've been reading is by Og Mandino. It's called The Greatest Salesman of the World. And it's amazing. I'm always reading something. I'm always healing and cultivating and building something.
That's awesome. What is something that you've failed at in life? I'm curious as to know, like, what's something that you were not successful in doing, do you think?
Oh, well, for the first 40 years of my life, having relationships.
Join the club.
But yeah, I mean, I because I was that wounded little boy.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I realize now, so it's like, here's Charles, wounded little boy. And here's, you know, it's like, you know, just like, and here's somebody, you know, it's like corresponding woundedness. It's like, you know, you have like someone else is like angry or scared or their woundedness and yours, and it can't be successful. It can be, in my experience, painfully codependent and become very toxic. And I played my part in that for sure. In the relationship that I was in at the time of 9/11, I know I did, because I didn't know any better. I was not home within myself.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I really love helping people with, whether they're my clients or not, whether it's a stranger on the subway, anybody, is helping people to feel and become home, that they are home within themselves.
I think I really relate to that, especially not just in my personal life, because me as well, I only met my wife and the love of my life when I was like 42, and it happened when I decided to come home to myself. And
Yeah.
I had, you know, unfulfilling relationships for all of my life, and to a point where I had thought, you know what, I need to stop this pattern. Mm-hmm. and take a step back and look, you know, like if you don't have what you desire, and you've been doing the same thing again and again throughout your life, it's time to try something new. And what I tried was actually looking inside and becoming a different person, becoming a person that my ideal partner would actually really want to be with, you know?
Right.
And
right.
It was
about let's see, 12 years ago. I read it in a book somewhere. I don't remember if it was in Ian Levanzant book or Eckhart Tolle. I'm not even sure right now. But I read about affirming, like creating an affirmation for the things that you want in your life. And so by then, so I was about 2.5 years sober at the time. And I wanted to be able to see like what dating was actually really like, because I'd never dated before. All the relationships I'd ever been in, I was just like instant boyfriend, just add water. You know, it was like, I never dated really. It was just, you know, and so what I did, so I created this affirmation for myself, and I thought that it was like, I was being so brave and it was so cool. And I said, and so I would raise my hands up to the heavens and I said, I know that the universe is preparing a wonderful sweetheart and a delicious experience for me. Doesn't that sound good? Yeah. I know that the universe is preparing a wonderful sweetheart and a delicious experience for me. However, so from my own level of awareness 12 years ago, I would say that affirmation and then I'd look at my watch and I'd be like, okay, where are they? I was impatient with the process. However, I continued to do the affirmation. And what one of the big lessons that I learned is that I needed to learn how to be a wonderful sweetheart to myself, because I didn't know what that, I did not know how to do that. Mm-hmm. I needed to learn how to be a delicious experience to myself. I needed to learn how to appreciate and accept myself. If I didn't do that, I would only be looking to fill that void with somebody else.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Well, we're sort of getting into the end of time. I have one last question for you. And that is, if you could send a message to your younger self 10 years ago or 12 years ago, what would Charles of today tell the Charles of 10 to 15 years ago?
Hang in there, buddy. Hang in there, buddy. You're doing a good job. You're doing a really good job. Continue learning how to love yourself. And as you do that, the depth of your own self-love is going to make it possible for you to have a real impact on a lot of people on the planet. People are going to, believe it or not, Charles, people are actually going to seek you out. People are going to seek you out, and they're going to want to know how it is that you do what you do. How do you show up as the man that you are with this cancer diagnosis that you received 2.5 years ago? How do you do that? So I'd say, keep on showing up and love yourself no matter what.
And with that, Charles West, I want to thank you for your time today, spending about 45 minutes with me for episode number 1 of Quantum Identity.
My pleasure. Thank you.
How you became who you are, and thank you for sharing your intimate transformation stories.
We only scratched the surface.
I'm sure we will. We'll have to bring you back.
Anytime.
And thank you very much.